Well, holy smokes everyone, in today's video we're going to go over the 30 trillion reasons why the Federal Reserve is doomed to fail right now. Because look at this clip when Jerome Powell is asked straight up about the debt and about how unsustainable it is and when is too much debt. And people, he looked terrified.
At what point in your judgment are we going to hit the point where you have to say, no, that's it. We can't do anymore. It's hurting the world. It's hurting our country.
So we don't know when that is, and as the world's reserve currency, demand for our paper is very strong. If you had shown that and then asked somebody 15 years ago to predict what interest rates would be, they wouldn't be predicting that the 10-year would be at 175.
No.
Right. So there'd been a lot of demand.
But they would have predicted that the debt was going to go up.
They would have looked at that picture and said, well, you must be experiencing difficulty borrowing, but we're not at all. So no, we're on an unsustainable path. Debt is not at an unsustainable level, but the path is unsustainable, meaning it's growing faster than the economy, meaningfully faster than the economy. We have to address that over time. We will address it over time. And the better way to do it is soon and to do it in good times. Start when the economy is strong and the taxes are rolling in. And that's since we don't do fiscal policy, but I will say that the sustainability of the debt is something we need to get back to.
I am never going to financially recover from this.
That's right. There's no way the US government is going to financially recover from this. So it is official now, everyone. The US government debt has hit $30 trillion. And I think now more than ever is the time to have the conversation. Okay, people, enough is enough. We have to deal with this before this causes one of the biggest financial crises we've ever seen. Because look at this, as we can see, US national debt over $30 trillion. And it's going to be increasing by trillion. Look at this, the US federal spending is $6.8 trillion, but the US federal tax revenue is only $4 trillion. So that's nearly a deficit of $3 trillion, people. And this is all happening right when interest rates are about to rise. And US federal debt is now 128% of GDP. Total personal debt is now $21 trillion. And look at this, the credit card balances are skyrocketing. Now $1,031 billion of credit card debt. But hey, they said, don't worry, interest rates are low. Go out there, buy, spend. Take on as much debt as you can. Party now, pay it off later. There won't be any issues at all. Well, everyone, it's now time to face the music of kicking the can down the road for the past 40 years. And what this has created and what this is going to test is the independence of the Federal Reserve. And they've really only got two choices: either lift interest rates to get inflation under control and crash the economy, or with the US government debt so high and coming under political pressure by the Biden administration, they may cave and not lift interest rates, but then this could lead to higher inflation. Listen to this, everyone. The breach of that threshold, which was revealed in a new Treasury Department figures, arrived years earlier than previously projected as a result of trillions in federal spending the United States has deployed to combat the pandemic. That's $5 trillion, which funded expanded jobless benefits, fiscal support for small businesses, and stimulus payments was financed with borrowed money. So that's right, everyone. The government spent $5 trillion just over the past year and a half to bring the economy just back to normal, not to create huge amounts of innovation, not to build huge amounts of infrastructure, just to bail out the financial institutions and to give people checks to go out there and spend. And on top of this, the Federal Reserve also increased their balance sheet by $5 trillion. So this is $10 trillion they've thrown at this dying economy just to try to bring it back to normal. Are you starting to see the figures are now starting to sound crazy, everyone? And you know what they're going to have to do during the next financial crisis? Hundreds of trillions of dollars. And this is where we're finally going to see, like so many people have been warning about for decades, that's the day when we're going to see the dollar really die. And you know what's funny, what many people have been saying for the past 10 years? They've been talking about this thing called modern monetary theory. That's a theory where if the US government is a well-reserved currency status, or if a government creates their own fiat currency, well, then deficits don't matter. They can just keep creating more and more currency, and it doesn't matter how big the deficits are or how high the debt goes. And then when good times come, then they just tax people more, which is definitely going to come, and what we're seeing now with the new IRS tax laws. And what's also funny, when the politicians and the US Treasury Secretary like Janet Yellen were asked about the debt, they're saying, look, it doesn't matter because interest rates are so low. This is what they've been saying in 2020 and 2021. Well, now it looks like inflation is out of control, and like Janet Yellen was saying that inflation was going to be transitory and that these supply chains will be fixed, well, they're not. and what's going to happen is interest rates do need to go up, then that means this debt isn't going to be cheap anymore, like she said. Listen to this. In January 2020, before the pandemic spread across the United States, the Congressional Budget Office projected that the gross national debt would reach 30 trillion. They thought it was going to reach that by 2025, but no, we've already reached that. The total debt held by public outpaced the size of American economy last year, a decade faster than the forecasters projected. So you're starting to get the picture here, people. This is crazy, unsustainable levels. And even though it hasn't caused a crisis yet, it is simply unavoidable. And at some point, they're going to have to simply face the music and start reducing expenses and stop increasing the debt by 2 to 3 trillion every year. Now, again, this is the dilemma the Federal Reserve is facing. You have markets pricing in that it's going to be 5 rate hikes this year. Even Bank of America is saying there could be 7 rate hikes. And that's just this year. Imagine if interest rates just went up 3% this rate hike cycle. That's going to lead to an additional $1 trillion in US interest costs alone. And with many people saying that it's likely that the economy is going to slow, or what happens if we enter in a recession late this year, what tools or what firepower ammunition is the government going to have to fight this when already the government and the Federal Reserve has already spent $10 trillion just over the past 18 months? Spoiler alert, everyone, they're not going to have many tools at all. And something happened in the 90s here where I live. It was something what the politicians called the recession we had to have. There just simply comes a time when the government and central bank can't keep kicking the can down the road, and eventually they need that healthy correction in the markets and in the economy and rebuild from a more sustainable base. Let me tell you a little secret why the government loves inflation so much. Because 1, it devalues the debt. And 2, it increases tax revenue. Because say, for example, they're like, let's tax the rich, tax the rich. But what happens if inflation gets out of control and then all of a sudden everyone's in the highest tax rate? Well, that's more tax revenue for the government, and then that helps them afford to service these high interest rate costs. And now they're even starting to admit it. Listen to this. Kenneth Rogoff, a Harvard University economist, said that rising prices essentially watered down the value of outstanding debt and increased tax revenue as income rises. He suggested that markets appeared to be largely unfazed by the possibility of higher interest rates. I tend to disagree. There's craziness happening in the markets right now. And that given other risks to the economy amid the pandemic, the scale of the national debt was not as worrying as it sounded. Yes, that was back then, but look what is happening now with it hitting $30 trillion. And the question you have to ask is, why do they still have all these emergency procedures in place if the economy is so-called booming? Why do they still have 0% interest rates? Why are they still buying US treasuries and mortgage-backed securities? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this economy is on training wheels. The Federal Reserve is the training wheels. And as soon as they take those training wheels off, the economy is not going to be able to support itself and it's going to collapse. So going back to what the Federal Reserve is doing, and let me give you another analogy. Say, for example, there's a bushfire, okay? There's a big fire, maybe like a California fire, or like where I'm in Victoria, there's a big bushfire. And so the fire is burning out of control. And say, for example, the Federal Reserve is a firefighter. And we can liken the bushfire to inflation. And so the firefighter, aka the Fed, and the fire, inflation, what really the Federal Reserve is doing is hoping the fire goes out on its own. They don't really want to fight it. So they could be like, okay, I'll go to fight the fire. And then so they go and slowly put on their boots. They slowly go in the truck. Then they slowly make their way to the fire. Then they take their time, and by the time they get there, the fire's already burnt down the whole forest. And this is what the Federal Reserve is doing with inflation. They're taking their time, they're dragging their feet, and they're hoping it goes away on its own. But what it's really going to do is going to burn people's purchasing power, and it's going to devalue the dollar so much, and then it'll be too late and the damage will already be done, just like what happens if you leave a fire burn through a forest. But what you're probably wanting to know is, okay, what does this mean for me in simple terms? Well, what this means is, everyone, like I said, they're in a dilemma. They've only got 2 choices. 1, fight inflation and bring the economy into recession, a recession that we need to have, a correction that we need, or a lot of talking, pretend like they're going to do something, let inflation run hot, and cross their fingers and pray that it goes away. And we can go from history, and what I'm thinking and what I fear is they're going to pick the latter. But what do you think, everyone? What do you think about the debt, and what do you think the Federal Reserve is going to do? Let me know. Now, for all my loyal viewers and subscribers still watching, you're awesome. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.